The moment Victoria Sinclair heard Logan Pierce was leaving work 3 hours early to meet a woman, she stopped breathing. Not visibly. Not in any way her executive assistant or the 7 people in the boardroom could detect. She kept her eyes on the quarterly projections. She kept her voice flat and her pen moving. But inside that immaculate chest, behind the tailored blazer and the reputation that had made grown men resign rather than face her in a negotiation, something cracked open. Who is she? If you've ever loved someone in silence, stay until the very end. Like this video and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The morning it all started, Logan Pierce burned his daughter's toast. Not badly, just enough that the edges went from golden to a shade darker than he'd intended. And Ava, 9 years old, already possessing the particular brand of dramatic honesty that children develop when they've spent too much time around adults, lifted one piece, examined it with theatrical gravity, and set it back down on the plate. "It's okay, Dad." "It's fine," he said, already moving to the toaster. "I'll make you another one." "No, really." She picked it back up and took a bite from the center, pointedly avoiding the edge. "I like it when you make it, even when it's a little burned." Logan looked at her. She had her mother's eyes, dark brown, wide set, the kind that held whatever they were looking at as if it mattered. He'd learned years ago not to think about that too long in the mornings, because mornings were for getting her fed and getting her backpack organized and getting her to school without either of them falling apart. "You don't have to say that," he said. "I know." She chewed. "I'm saying it because it's true." He let that sit. He poured her orange juice and himself a travel mug of coffee that he would finish in the car, parked 3 blocks from the office, sitting alone in the early quiet before the day came at him from every direction. That was the arrangement he'd worked out with himself. 15 minutes. Just 15 minutes where nobody needed anything from him. It wasn't much, but it was what he had. Logan Pierce was 32 years old, and he had the specific tiredness of a man who had been holding everything together for so long that he'd stopped noticing the weight. It had become his baseline. The bones adjusted, the shoulders learned to carry it. He was not a remarkable-looking man, not in the way that stopped people in corridors. Medium height, dark hair that needed a cut, always, perpetually 2 weeks overdue for the appointment he kept scheduling and canceling. A jaw that had some sharpness to it, softened by a mouth that defaulted towards something almost like a smile even when he was exhausted, which was most of the time. His colleagues at Meridian Technologies called it his crisis face. The expression he wore when 3 systems were simultaneously failing, and he was already 3 steps into fixing them, calm in a way that other people found either reassuring or faintly unnerving, depending on how much they understood about what was actually happening. He'd been at Meridian for 6 years, started as a mid-level software architect, quietly built the infrastructure backbone that everyone relied on without knowing who'd built it, turned down 2 promotions in the last 4 years. The promotions would have meant more money, yes, but they would have also meant less predictability, later nights, weekend calls. He'd run the math once, written it out on a legal pad at the kitchen table after Ava was asleep. More money in exchange for the school pickups, the Tuesday afternoon piano lessons, the nights when she had nightmares and came padding down the hall in her socks and needed him to just be there. He'd torn up the legal pad and called HR the next morning to decline. People thought that was strange. His manager at the time, a well-meaning man named Robert Okafor, had sat him down and asked gently whether everything was all right at home. "Everything's fine," Logan had said. "I just know what matters to me." Robert had nodded slowly, in the way people nodded when they suspected they were missing something but didn't know what question to ask. Logan had never tried to explain it further. He didn't need anyone to understand it. He just needed it to work. And mostly, it worked. Meridian Technologies occupied the top 4 floors of a glass building in the financial district, the kind of building designed to look simultaneously expensive and effortless, the architectural equivalent of someone who'd never had to think about money. The lobby had a living wall, actual plants, some variety of trailing green thing maintained by a service that came in twice a week, and a reception desk staffed by a young woman named Petra, who greeted Logan by name every morning and handed him a visitor badge he didn't technically need anymore, but had never bothered to ask to stop receiving. "Morning, Mr. Pierce." "Morning, Petra. How's the coffee situation up on 12? "Freshly restocked." Someone apparently drank the last of the dark roast yesterday at 4 in the afternoon, and it caused a minor incident. That would have been Marcus. It would have been Marcus, she agreed, already turning to the next person in the elevator queue. He rode up to the 12th floor, where the engineering team lived in a space that Victoria Sinclair had specifically designed to not look like the sort of place where Victoria Sinclair worked. Open desks, adjustable standing configurations, a long wall of writable glass. The executive floors were 30 and 31. Different air up there, different carpet, different quality of silence. Logan had been up there exactly 3 times in 6 years. He didn't miss it. His own desk was in the corner by the window that faced north, which meant he got no direct sunlight and a view of the building across the street, which was fine. He had a second monitor propped on a stack of technical manuals. He had a framed photograph of Ava from last year's school trip to the Natural History Museum, grinning in front of a dinosaur skeleton, both arms out like she was presenting it. And he had, tucked in the pen holder at the back of his desk, a folded drawing she'd made him when she was 6, a crayon family portrait of the 2 of them holding hands, both figures rendered with a touching disregard for anatomical proportion, labeled in unsteady block letters, "Me and Daddy." He'd never taken it down. The morning passed, the way most mornings passed, fast, layered, full of problems that required him to hold 3 things in his head simultaneously while speaking to someone about a 4th. He debugged a latency issue in the customer authentication pipeline, sat in on a 40-minute architecture review that should have been an email, and ate half a sandwich at his desk at 11:30 because he'd learned years ago that if he didn't eat early, he often didn't eat at all. Marcus Webb, his closest colleague and the most consistently loud person in any room he occupied, dropped into the chair beside Logan's desk at noon with the energy of a man who had been waiting all morning to talk to someone. "Did you see the thing?" Marcus said. "Which thing?" "The thing. Sinclair's all-hands memo from last night." Logan had seen it. He'd read it at 6:45 that morning over coffee, while Ava was brushing her teeth. "I saw it. She's talking about the Q3 infrastructure audit like it's a small adjustment. Logan, mate, it's not a small adjustment. She's talking about rebuilding the entire client data architecture before the fiscal year closes." "I know." "That's your architecture." "I know." "Does she know it's your architecture?" Logan considered this with the particular patience of someone who had long ago made peace with being invisible. Someone does. Whether that information has reached the 31st floor is a different question. Marcus stared at him. "You're genuinely unbothered by this." "I'm not unbothered. I'm tired. There's a difference." "How do you do that? How do you just—" Marcus gestured vaguely at all of Logan, as if his entire person was the thing that required explanation. "Absorb it." "Practice," Logan said, and turned back to his screen. Victoria Sinclair became the CEO of Meridian Technologies at 28 years old, and by 30 she had turned a mid-tier software firm into something that made its competitors reconsider their strategies at the quarterly level. She was not beloved by the industry press. They oscillated between grudging respect and thinly veiled hostility, which she'd always taken as confirmation that she was doing something right. She was precise, systematic, and allergic to sentimentality and professional contexts. She expected people to bring solutions, not problems. She expected meetings to end on time. She expected the reports on her desk at 7 a.m. to actually reflect the truth, rather than the version of events her department heads preferred she believe. She was also, in the private accounting of several people who'd worked closely with her over the years, profoundly alone in ways she either didn't notice or refused to address. At 30, she ran marathons on Saturday mornings, maintained an apartment that looked like a very expensive hotel room, and hadn't taken a vacation in 3 years. She didn't date, not in any sustained sense. There had been a short-lived relationship with a venture capitalist 2 years ago that had ended mutually and cleanly, both of them having been too similar to sustain anything past the initial phase of finding each other interesting. She didn't have close friends so much as high-functioning professional relationships that occasionally involved a dinner and a shared bottle of wine. She would not have described herself as unhappy. She would not have described herself as lonely. She would have said, "I have what I chose, and I chose this." She believed that. Mostly. She first noticed Logan Pierce properly, not as a name on an org chart, not as a handle in a repository commit log, on a Tuesday in March, when a server outage knocked out the payment processing system for 17 minutes during peak hours, and he was the one who fixed it. She'd been in her office when the alert came in. She'd called her CTO, who'd been in a lunch meeting and had taken 4 minutes to respond, which was 3 minutes longer than Victoria considered acceptable. By the time she reached the operations center on the 12th floor, someone had already contained the issue and was implementing the patch. She'd stood in the doorway and watched a man she didn't recognize work with the focused economy of someone who had done this exact thing before, not in a crisis, but in a controlled environment, because he'd anticipated it could happen and had prepared for it anyway. "Who is that?" she'd asked Diane, the operations manager. "Logan Pierce, senior architect. He's been here." Diane had paused to think. 5 years? 6? He's the one who built the original payment routing layer. Of course, he's the one who fixed it. Victoria had watched him for another minute. He was calm. Not performing calm, actually calm, which were different things, and she'd learned to tell them apart. His voice, when he spoke to the junior engineer beside him, was even and clear and specific. He said exactly what needed to happen and nothing extra. Then he looked up, not at her, but at the status board on the wall, and she'd seen his face in proper light for the first time, the tiredness in it, the absolute absence of theater. He wasn't doing this to be seen doing it. He was doing it because it needed doing, and he was the one who knew how. She'd gone back to her office and pulled his file. Senior architect, level 4, 6 years at Meridian. Declined promotion to principal architect in 2021. Declined promotion to architecture director in 2023. Performance reviews uniformly excellent. No disciplinary record. Single. Parent. Single parent. She'd sat with that for a moment, not sure what she was doing, then closed the file and gone back to work. She hadn't thought about him again, or had told herself she hadn't, until the meeting in April where his name came up in an unexpected context. She'd been reviewing the Q3 planning proposals when her CTO, a capable but perpetually cautious man named Arthur Hale, had said, "We should pull Pierce in on this. The data architecture changes overlap directly with the systems he built. Does he have capacity?" "He'll make capacity," Arthur had said, which was, she would learn, simply true. Logan Pierce apparently always made capacity. He'd come to the 31st floor for the first time in what Arthur told her had been over a year. He'd worn what she would later understand to be his standard work clothes, dark trousers, a blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow. And he'd sat across the table from her and talked about the proposed architecture changes with the frank, slightly impatient precision of someone who had very specific opinions and was choosing to share them professionally rather than emotionally. "The migration timeline is too aggressive," he said, not looking at her any more than he looked at anyone else. "You're assuming clean data states going into the new system. Based on what I know about the current database, you're not going to find clean data states. You'll find legacy fields that haven't been documented since 2019 and interdependencies that aren't in any current technical spec because the people who built them didn't write things down." "Can you document them?" she asked. "I've been documenting them, informally, in my own system. It's not a format that maps cleanly to what your team is using for the audit." There had been a brief silence. Arthur had coughed. "Could you convert it to a format that does map cleanly?" Victoria asked. "I could. It would take 3 weeks and would need to be actual work time, not something I do on top of everything else." "Then it becomes actual work time," she said, "starting tomorrow." He'd looked at her directly for the first time, a brief assessing look, like he was deciding whether she meant it. Apparently deciding that she did, he'd nodded and moved on. She'd thought about that look for the rest of the day. The request came in on a Thursday, through the standard early departure system that employees used for personal appointments, medical commitments, that sort of thing. Logan Pierce was requesting to leave at 2 p.m. rather than 5. Personal appointment, family matter, that was all it said. Victoria saw it because early departure requests above level 3 came across her executive dashboard as part of a resource management protocol she'd set up years ago and had never dismantled, even after the department had grown large enough that reviewing them individually was arguably unnecessary. She read them anyway. She always read everything. She looked at Logan's request for longer than she should have. Family matter. She'd approved it immediately because of course she had. He had an immaculate attendance record. He was owed approximately 400 hours of overtime that the company would never pay, and a single early departure was not something that required deliberation. She approved it and moved on to the next item on the dashboard. Except she didn't move on. Not really. The question arrived before she'd fully formed it. Who is he meeting? She knew from his file that he was a single father. The personnel records were sparse on personal detail, the way personnel records always were. She knew his emergency contact was listed as a woman named Caroline Webb, Marcus Webb's wife, Logan's closest friend's spouse, which told her he didn't have family nearby, or at least not family he trusted with that role. She knew he had a daughter, 9 years old. A 9-year-old didn't constitute a family matter that required leaving work 3 hours early on a Thursday unless something was wrong, or unless it was something else entirely. Unless he's meeting someone. She stood up from her desk, sat back down, pulled up a set of projections she'd already reviewed twice and stared at them without reading them. This was absurd. She was aware that it was absurd. She was also aware, with the same systematic self-honesty that she applied to everything, that her chest felt strange in a way she didn't have a professional category for. Who is she? She found out from the worst possible source, which was office gossip, which reached her third hand through her assistant Nina, who had heard it from someone in operations, who had heard it directly from Marcus Webb, who apparently had the discretion of a golden retriever. His daughter set him up, Nina said, in the tone of someone who found this both charming and tragic in approximately equal measure. Apparently, the little girl coordinated with her music teacher to arrange some kind of meeting? A coffee, I think, or a lunch. The teacher knows a woman from her community choir, early 30s, recently divorced. Victoria sat very still. Apparently the daughter's been worrying about him, Nina continued, apparently not noticing that her boss had stopped blinking. She thinks he needs company, someone for him. Thank you, Nina, Victoria said. That'll be all. Nina left. Victoria turned her chair to face the window. 41 floors below, the street moved with its usual indifference. Taxis, pedestrians, a cyclist navigating the gap between a parked truck and a bus. She watched it without seeing it. A 9-year-old girl had looked at her father and decided he was lonely. And she was right. She was obviously right. Victoria had watched Logan Pierce operate in this building for months, in meetings, in the corridors, in the quiet hours when most people had gone home, and he was still at his desk because the work wasn't finished. And she had never once seen him with his guard fully down. He was always carrying something, always managing the distance between himself and everyone around him with the practiced ease of someone who'd learned, somewhere along the way, that need was a vulnerability he couldn't afford to show. She understood that. She understood it in her body, the way you understood things you'd been doing for so long they'd become structural. She also understood, sitting there at her window on the 31st floor, that she was jealous of a woman she had never met, who was having coffee or lunch with a man who didn't know she existed, not as herself, not as a person. The realization did not sit comfortably. She let it sit anyway. She started paying attention differently after that. Not obviously. Victoria Sinclair did nothing, obviously. She paid attention the way she did everything, with precision, from a controlled distance, without revealing her hand. She began reading the 12th floor reports more carefully than they warranted, flagging items that required Logan's specific input rather than routing them through Arthur. She found reasons to include him in cross-department calls. Twice she walked through the 12th floor in the late afternoon under the pretense of an informal walkthrough, and both times he was still at his desk, not because he was trying to be seen staying late, but because the work was still in progress and he hadn't finished it. She learned things about him the way you learn things about someone when you were paying close attention, and they had no idea. He took his lunch at his desk on Tuesdays and Thursdays and was almost certainly calling his daughter's school to check something because he was never on those calls longer than 4 minutes and always seemed slightly more settled afterward. He drank bad coffee from the floor machine without complaint. He helped a junior developer named Sophie through a complex debugging problem on a Friday afternoon at 4:45 without any visible irritation at the timing, walking her through it step by step in the patient-specific way you treated someone's confusion like it was just another problem to be solved rather than an inconvenience. She was beginning to understand, genuinely kind. Not performatively kind. Not the strategic warmth of someone who'd been coached that likability was a professional asset. Just actually, quietly, substantively kind in ways that nobody was formally recognizing because they weren't the kind of kindness that made it onto performance reviews. It made something in her chest ache with a quality she didn't have a word for. The coffee meeting, Marcus informed the entire 12th floor without anyone asking, had not gone anywhere. It was fine, Marcus said, with the defeated energy of a man who'd been hoping for a different outcome. She was a perfectly nice person. They had coffee. He came home. Ava apparently was furious. The daughter? Someone said. The daughter. She's 9, and she apparently told him she'd put a lot of work into this, and the least he could do was try. There was general laughter. Logan, who was at his desk and clearly within earshot of all of this, did not look up from his screen. What did he say? Sophie asked. He told her he did try. And she told him. Marcus paused for effect, clearly having enjoyed this detail. She told him, Dad, trying means being open. You weren't open. You were just there. More laughter. This time Logan looked up briefly, caught Marcus's eye with an expression of mild exhaustion, and looked back down. 9 years old, Marcus said, shaking his head. Absolute menace. Victoria, who had no legitimate reason to be on the 12th floor at this hour, and had invented one anyway, stood near the coffee station with her tablet and pretended to read something. She was actually thinking about a 9-year-old girl telling her father that he was present but not open, that proximity wasn't the same thing as being there, and that she'd put work into this because she loved him enough to keep trying even when he made it hard. She thought about that for the rest of the day. 2 weeks later, Logan turned down the rival company. She only knew about it because Arthur came to her office with a look of carefully restrained alarm and said, Fortis Systems made an approach to Logan Pierce directly. When? Apparently they've been in contact for 3 weeks. The offer came in formally yesterday. She kept her face exactly where it was. And? He declined. This morning. He sent them a very polite email that apparently included the phrase, "This company feels like home," which Fortis's recruiter passed along to our HR department in what I can only describe as a spirit of baffled irritation. Victoria looked at Arthur for a moment. Why would he tell us that? Apparently it's standard practice when a competitor approach is declined, to maintain the relationship. Fortis thought we'd want to know. She processed that. What was the offer? Arthur told her. The number was significant. It was frankly embarrassing in the context of what Meridian was currently paying him. She made a note. She also felt something shift in her understanding of Logan Pierce that she couldn't quite articulate. Something about a man who'd been quietly essential to this company for 6 years, who had declined promotions and turned down a competitor's offer and called the place home, and had never once appeared to expect anything in return. He should be compensated appropriately for his role, she said. Set up a meeting. I'll handle it personally. Arthur looked mildly surprised. You want to handle the compensation discussion personally? Yes, she said, and went back to her work. She did not examine why. She was getting better at not examining things she wasn't ready to examine. The compensation meeting was brief and, for Logan, visibly uncomfortable in a way that Victoria found both understandable and difficult to watch. He sat across from her in the small conference room on the 31st floor, the one with the good chairs and the view west, which she'd chosen without being entirely sure why, and received the news of the salary adjustment and the supplemental equity package with the expression of a man who had not known what to expect and was now recalibrating. He stopped. It reflects your actual contribution to the company, she said, which hasn't been reflected in your compensation. That's a failure on our part that I'm correcting. You didn't have to do it personally. I know. He looked at her. That same brief, direct look she'd first registered in the Q3 meeting, the look that evaluated whether she meant what she said. Thank you, he said finally. You're welcome. She paused, then said something she hadn't planned to say. Why did you decline Fortis? He was quiet for a moment. He had his hands folded on the table, a thing she'd noticed he did when he was thinking, that particular stillness. My daughter knows my commute, he said. She knows what time I get home. She plans her day around it. He paused. I wasn't going to change that for a number. Victoria looked at him. She thought about the files she'd read months ago, single, parent, and about what those two words had actually meant, unpacked into real days and real mornings, and a burned piece of toast, and a little girl who'd tried to arrange her father's happiness because she could see he wasn't quite managing it on his own. That makes sense, she said, because it did, entirely. He nodded. The meeting ended. He went back to the 12th floor. She sat for a while in the conference room with the good chairs and watched the sky go orange over the western buildings, and tried to remember the last time she'd made a decision based on who needed her to come home. She couldn't think of one. The realization was not comfortable. She sat with it anyway. Well, the Thursday afternoon call came from Ava's school at 3:27, while Logan was mid-sentence in a technical review. He saw the number, said, "Sorry, 1 second," to the three people on the call, and stepped away from his desk. Victoria, who happened to be walking through the 12th floor at the time on her way back from the operations center, watched him take the call near the windows at the far end. She couldn't hear what he was saying. She could see his face. It changed. Not dramatically, not in any way that broadcast itself to the room, but it changed in the small, specific way of someone absorbing information they hadn't anticipated. His jaw shifted. His shoulders altered their angle by a fraction. Then he straightened, said something into the phone with a nod that the person on the other end couldn't see, and came back to his desk. "I'm sorry," he said to the call. "I need to cut this short. Family issue. We can pick this up tomorrow. I'll send notes." He ended the call, began closing things on his screen with the focused efficiency of someone who'd done this particular pivot before, and went to submit his early departure request through the standard system. Victoria walked back to her office. She was approving the request before she'd sat down, before she'd had time to talk herself out of sitting there with the question that had taken up residence in her chest 3 months ago and refused to be evicted. She approved it. Then she sat at her desk with the projections open on one screen and the staffing dashboard on the other, and she stared at Logan Pierce's personnel file photo. Standard corporate headshot, slightly too bright, him looking just to the left of the camera with that expression he had, that almost smile that wasn't quite a smile. And she thought, with a clarity that arrived without warning and without mercy, I want him to be okay. Not as an employee, not as an asset to the company. Just okay. She wanted the tiredness to lift, even a little. She wanted the 9-year-old girl who had looked at her father and seen his loneliness to be right, that it wasn't permanent. She closed the file. She stood up. She went to the window. Far below, she couldn't see him leave, of course. He was just one person among thousands moving through the city on a Thursday afternoon, one man in a blue shirt walking to wherever his daughter needed him. But she stood there anyway, watching the street, with her hand pressed flat against the glass. And for the first time in years, Victoria Sinclair didn't know what she wanted from herself. That was perhaps the most honest thing she'd felt in a very long time. The school had called about a fall. Nothing serious. That was the first thing they'd told him, which was also what parents were always told first, the verbal equivalent of putting your hands up before you delivered bad news. Nothing serious. Ava had tripped on the gymnasium stairs during afternoon PE and come down hard on her wrist. The school nurse didn't think it was broken, but they couldn't rule it out, and the policy was clear. A parent needed to come in. Logan had gotten there in 22 minutes, which required a cab and some creative interpretation of a one-way street, and found Ava sitting in the nurse's office with an ice pack on her wrist and the specific expression of a child who had decided she was not going to cry in public and was working very hard to maintain that position. "Hey," he said, crouching down to her level. "It doesn't hurt that much," she said immediately. "Okay? I'm not going to cry." "I know you're not." Chloe Martinez cried when she sprained her ankle in October, and people kept talking about it for like 2 weeks. That's rough. "I'm not going to be that." He looked at her wrist, at the ice pack, at the careful way she was holding her arm slightly away from her body in that protective posture people adopted when something hurt more than they were admitting. "Can I see?" She extended her arm slowly. He looked without touching. "All right," he said. "Let's go get it checked." The urgent care clinic 2 blocks from their apartment confirmed a minor hairline fracture. Not a full break, but enough to require a soft cast for 3 weeks, and a stern conversation from a pediatric physician who had clearly delivered this particular speech many times and had not lost her conviction about it. Ava listened with enormous solemnity and asked 3 questions, all of them specific and practical, which made the doctor smile in a way she was trying to conceal. On the walk home, Ava was quiet for half a block. Then, "Dad? Yeah. I'm sorry you had to leave work." "Don't be. I know you had a meeting." "Ava, I'm just saying I know." He stopped walking. She stopped too, turning to look up at him on the sidewalk with the ice pack still loosely held to her wrist and her backpack slightly lopsided. The late afternoon was doing that thing it did in autumn, the light going amber and long, hitting the buildings at an angle that made everything look more significant than it probably was. "Listen to me," he said. "There is no meeting. There is no project. There is nothing at that office that matters more than you. Do you understand that?" She looked at him. "You always say that." "Because it's always true." "But you never take days off. You haven't taken a vacation since—" She paused, calculating. "I don't even remember." "I take days off." "Dad, you worked from your laptop on Christmas Eve." He opened his mouth, closed it. That was unfortunately accurate. "Half a day," he said, "and it was an emergency." "You said that last time too." They stood there on the sidewalk, the two of them, and Logan looked at his daughter, at the quiet worry in her face that she was trying to frame as argument, the way she'd learned to package concern as logic because she'd spent 9 years watching him do the same thing. And he felt the familiar pull of wanting to reassure her and the less familiar discomfort of knowing she wasn't wrong. "Come on," he said. "Let's go home. I'll make dinner. Can we order from the Thai place? You just got a fracture. What does that have to do with Thai food?" "Nothing," he admitted. "Yeah, we can order from the Thai place." She fell into step beside him, and for a while they just walked, and he kept his pace slightly slower than usual, so she didn't have to rush, and she pretended not to notice that he was doing it. He was back in the office by 8 the next morning, which was normal, and found Marcus already at his desk with coffee and the news that things had gotten complicated overnight. "Fortis," Marcus said, without preamble, which was how he delivered most things. "What about them?" "They didn't take the no personally. Or they did take it personally, and their response to that is to go after Meridian directly rather than just poaching talent." Marcus turned his monitor so Logan could see the tech news digest he'd pulled up. "Overnight, they announced a competing product line, direct overlap with our enterprise client suite." Logan read the headline, then the first 2 paragraphs. When did they develop this? That's the question everyone's asking, because the timeline doesn't make sense. They would have needed at least 14 months to build something this close to our architecture without starting from our architecture. Logan looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Logan. "Someone talked," Logan said. "Someone talked," Marcus agreed. The silence between them had the particular weight of something being acknowledged that neither of them wanted to fully say out loud, because once you said it out loud, it became something that had to be dealt with. "Do we know who has access to the enterprise suite specs?" Logan asked. "You do. Arthur does. 3 people on the product team, and anyone who's been in the strategic planning meetings for the last 18 months. "That's a lot of people." "That's a lot of people," Marcus confirmed. Logan straightened, picked up his coffee, and looked at the screen for another moment. "Does Sinclair know?" She called an executive meeting for 9 a.m. "And you know this how?" "Nina told Petra. Petra told Jackie. In ops, Jackie told me." Marcus shrugged. "Information moves." "It really shouldn't move that fast." "I know, but here we are." Victoria had been awake since 4:30. She hadn't meant to be. She'd gone to bed at 11, which was late by her standards, but not unusual, and had slept for a few hours before the kind of wakefulness arrived that wasn't really wakefulness. It was her brain refusing to stop working in the dark, processing things she'd been too busy to process during the day. The Fortis announcement, the timing, the specific nature of the overlap that felt less like parallel development and more like someone had handed them a map. She'd made coffee at 5 and sat at her kitchen table. The apartment was very quiet at that hour, the city not quite awake, the light outside still flat and gray, and worked through what she knew. The Enterprise Suite, the 14-month development window, the access list, the strategic planning documents that lived on a server she'd believed was adequately secured. Believed. Past tense, apparently. She was cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. By 6, she was at the office. By 7, she'd reviewed the access logs for the strategic planning server and found 3 anomalies she'd flagged for her security team. By 8, she had a preliminary picture that was incomplete but suggestive enough to make her chest tight with the specific anger of someone who'd trusted her house and found a door left open from the inside. At 9, she sat at the head of the executive conference table and looked at the 5 people across from her, Arthur, the heads of product and legal, her CFO, and her chief security officer, and said, "Tell me what we know." The security officer, a precise woman named Dana Park, laid it out methodically. The access anomalies, the timing windows, the server logs that showed 3 instances of large file transfers in the small hours of 2 mornings over the past 4 months, both originating from internal addresses that traced back to workstations that should, at that hour, have been locked and idle. "Whose workstations?" Victoria asked. Dana paused with the slight hesitation of someone who knew the answer was going to change the room. "One traces to Logan Pierce's station." The silence lasted about 2 seconds. Then Arthur said carefully, "That doesn't necessarily mean—" "I know what it doesn't necessarily mean," Victoria said. Her voice was flat, not sharp. The flatness was worse, and everyone at the table knew it. "Who else?" 2 other instances traced to workstations assigned to Kyle Brennan and Sandra Orr. Both product team leads. Both with full access to the Enterprise Suite documentation. "I want all 3 interviewed," Victoria said. "Today, separately, legal present." "Victoria," Arthur began. "I know how this looks," she said. "I also know that the way this looks might not be what it is. Do the interviews." She kept her face where it was, and her voice where it was, and her hands flat on the table where they were. And she told herself that Logan Pierce's name on a server log at 3 in the morning was a data point, not a conclusion, and that she was a rational adult who understood the difference between correlation and culpability. She told herself that. She also sat with something cold and uncomfortable in her chest that she recognized with a kind of grim self-awareness as the specific pain of suspecting someone you didn't want to suspect. Logan found out he was being investigated at 11:15 when HR asked him to come to the conference room on the 31st floor for what they described as a routine inquiry. He'd been around long enough to know that was not a phrase used for routine inquiries. He came up in the elevator alone, adjusted his sleeves, and walked into the room to find a senior HR representative named Gerald, one of the company's legal advisors, and, not Victoria, which he'd half expected, a second lawyer he didn't recognize. "Mr. Pierce," Gerald said, "thanks for coming up." "Sure," Logan said, sitting down across from them. He kept his hands loose on the table. "What's this about?" Gerald explained it with the deliberate care of someone who'd been coached on exactly how much to say. Server access anomaly, file transfer from his workstation, security reviewing all relevant logs in connection with the Fortis situation. Logan listened. He listened the way he listened to everything, attentively, without visible reaction, giving nothing away. When Gerald finished, there was a pause, and then Logan said, "What time are the logs showing the transfer from my station?" Gerald checked his notes. 3:14 and 3:17 a.m. on the 14th and 28th of last month. "I was at home both those nights," Logan said. "I can prove that. My daughter had a fever on the 14th. I was up most of the night with her. I called the after-hours nurse line at 2:40 a.m. That call is logged. The 28th was a Thursday. I picked Ava up from piano at 6. We went to the grocery store. We were home by 7:30. My building has keycard entry logs." He said all of this evenly, the way you stated facts, not defensively, not angrily, because neither of those things would help, and he'd learned a long time ago that panic was something you felt privately and managed outwardly. "We'll need to verify," the legal advisor said. "I know," Logan said. "Verify." Marcus, characteristically, heard about the inquiry within 30 minutes and arrived at Logan's desk with the energy of someone who had strong opinions and was only barely containing them. "This is insane," he said, low enough to not carry to the surrounding desks, but with enough force that it conveyed what he thought of the situation. "It's a process," Logan said. "They're doing the same with Kyle and Sandra. Kyle and Sandra don't have clear alibis for both nights. I don't know what they have. That's not my problem. Your name is on a server log." "I know." "Logan? Marcus." He kept his voice quiet. "I know. It's going to get sorted. Don't make it a thing on this floor." Marcus looked at him for a long moment, in the particular way of someone trying to determine whether the person they were looking at was actually as calm as they appeared or whether they were in the early stages of a contained implosion. "Are you okay?" "I'm managing." "That's not the same thing." "I know it's not." He turned back to his screen. "Let me work." Victoria reviewed the alibi documentation that afternoon. The nurse line call was time-stamped and logged. 2:41 a.m., 14 minutes, her daughter's name in the system. The building keycard log confirmed Logan's entry and exit on the 28th, matching what he'd described. Both nights, he was exactly where he said he was. She sat with that for a while. Then she pulled up the remaining access logs with fresh attention, not looking for confirmation of what she'd feared, but looking for what was actually there, and found something she'd missed in the first review. The file transfers from Logan's workstation had originated from a remote session token. Someone had accessed the system using his credentials remotely, which meant someone had his credentials, which meant this wasn't carelessness. This was deliberate. She called Dana Park. "Someone used his login," she said when Dana answered. "We're seeing the same thing," Dana said. "We think the credential was harvested 4 months ago from a phishing incident on the external network. There's a similar pattern on 2 other accounts." A pause. Kyle Brennan's personal email was also compromised. "We're pulling his traffic now." "And Sandra Orr?" "Sandra's station logged the transfer, but she initiated it. We can see that clearly. The session token is local, not remote." Victoria said nothing for a moment. Then, "How long have you known?" "I've known for 40 minutes. I wanted to be certain before I called you." "Understood," she said. "Get me everything." She hung up. She stood at the window of her office and looked out at the city and thought about a man sitting in a conference room on this floor 2 hours ago, being questioned about something he hadn't done, and doing it with the composure of someone who'd decided a long time ago that falling apart was not an option available to him. She thought about his voice saying, "I was up most of the night with her." Not as an alibi, really, but as a fact. Just a fact of his life. His daughter had a fever, and he was up all night, and somewhere in between he'd had his credentials stolen by someone who'd been more careful about covering their tracks than they'd been careful about being decent. She picked up her phone and called Arthur. "Clear Pierce," she said. "Today, publicly, inside the team. I want him to know by end of day that the matter is resolved from our side." "We still have the Sandra question open." "I know. Handle that separately. But Logan Pierce walks out of here today without this hanging over him. Arthur said he'd take care of it." She put the phone down and went back to her window and stood there and didn't look at the personnel file on her screen that she'd had open again without fully meaning to. Gerald came to Logan's desk at 4:15 with Arthur Hale, which was unusual enough that the surrounding desks went fractionally quieter, in the way that people who are pretending not to listen become very still. "We owe you an apology," Arthur said, which was also not something Arthur said often enough to be unremarkable. "The transfer was traced to a remote session using a harvested credential. You were not the source." Logan nodded. "The matter is closed from the company's side," Gerald said. "It'll be documented as such." "Thank you," Logan said. They left. He turned back to his screen. Marcus, who had been present for this entire exchange with the stillness of a man who had been waiting for it, let out a slow breath. "Told you," Logan said without looking up. "I never doubted you," Marcus said. "You were extremely worried." "I was worried for you. There's a difference." Logan allowed a small, tired version of a smile to show up briefly on his face and went back to work. What he didn't know, and wouldn't know until Marcus told him later that evening over a beer, He'd agreed to primarily to escape the apartment's particular Thursday silence. Victoria Sinclair had made the call to clear his name herself before the investigation was fully complete, based on incomplete evidence that she'd apparently decided was complete enough. She didn't wait, Marcus said, with the look of someone presenting information they found significant. She had enough to act on, Logan said. Arthur said she called him before Dana had finished compiling the report. Logan looked at his beer. That's not standard process, Marcus added, not quite casually enough. Okay, Logan said. I'm just noting it. I noticed your note. And? Logan set his glass down. Across the bar, a group of people were laughing at something. That easy, uncomplicated laughter of people who weren't carrying anything particular, who were just there and happy about it. He watched them for a moment. I don't know what to do with it, he said, honestly. Marcus, for once, didn't push. He picked up his own drink and let the bar's noise fill the space between them. Geng. Ava's wrist was healing. She'd adapted to the soft cast with the resourcefulness of a 9-year-old for whom problems were primarily logistical. She'd developed a one-handed method of getting her backpack on that involved a combination of a chair hook and shoulder rotation that she demonstrated for Logan on Saturday morning with evident pride. I worked it out myself, she said. I can tell. You don't have to help me with it anymore? Good. He meant it. Watching her work things out for herself was something he tried to not interfere with, even when it was hard to stand there and wait. She looked at him over breakfast, in the specific way that meant she was building to something. He'd learned to wait. Dad, she said, there's a father-daughter night at school. When? Next Friday. Okay, I'll be there. She nodded, but she was still looking at him with that expression. He reached for his coffee and waited. Ms. Okafor said there's going to be a performance, Ava said carefully, by the students. Are you performing? A pause. Maybe. Ava. I'm considering it. He looked at her. She looked at her toast. The morning light came in through the kitchen window and caught the edge of her cast, the pale blue of it, and he thought about the way she'd held her arm on the sidewalk outside the urgent care clinic, protective, careful, not asking for more than she needed. You know you can tell me things, he said. I know. She picked up her toast. I'm just not ready to tell you this one yet. He accepted that. He also made a note to himself that the note existed, that there was something she was working on, something she was keeping private from him in the particular way of someone who was planning something rather than hiding something, and that the difference mattered. He filed it away. He was good at holding things quietly. It was perhaps too much of what he was good at. Outside, the city was getting on with itself, indifferent and moving, the way cities did. And in a glass building in the financial district, 31 floors up, a woman who had ordered the protection of a man's reputation before she had all the facts was sitting at her desk in the early morning, reading a report she'd already read once, and not thinking about him. She was very deliberately not thinking about him. She was not succeeding. The week between the investigation and father-daughter night passed the way bad weeks did. Not dramatically, not in a single crisis, but in a slow accumulation of small frictions that wore at the edges of things. Sandra Orr was placed on administrative leave pending the full security review, which generated a particular kind of quiet on the 12th floor. The kind where people spoke slightly less freely than usual and kept their screens angled slightly more toward themselves. Nobody said anything directly to Logan about it, which was its own form of acknowledgement. Kyle Brennan had been cleared of intentional wrongdoing but was flagged for a security training review due to the phishing breach, a distinction that satisfied the legal requirements and satisfied no one emotionally. Logan noticed the shift in the floor's atmosphere the same way he noticed most things, quietly, without comment, filing it away. He got his work done. He ate his lunch at his desk. He helped Sophie debug a problem with the authentication module that had been causing intermittent failures for 2 weeks, and that turned out, as these things often did, to have a root cause that was embarrassingly simple once you knew where to look. How did you know to look there? Sophie asked, staring at the 2 lines of code they'd finally isolated. I built the original version of that module, Sos, he said. I knew where I'd cut corners because I was working under a deadline. You cut corners? Everyone cuts corners when they're under a deadline. The trick is to remember where you cut them. She looked at him with the expression of someone filing that away for future use. That should be a poster or something. Please don't make it a poster. No promises. He almost laughed. Almost. That particular Logan Pierce calibration of amusement that stopped just short of the full expression, like a light turned down to 70%. Victoria, meanwhile, was working through something she didn't have clean language for. The Sandra situation had resolved itself in the way that ugly situations sometimes did, with documentation and process and the flat procedural language of HR and legal that efficiently drained the human ugliness out of something that was, underneath, a straightforward act of betrayal. Sandra had been passing proprietary documentation to a Fortis contact for 8 months. She'd been careful. Not careful enough, ultimately, but careful enough that it had taken a credential harvesting incident and the resulting log review to expose the pattern. Victoria had sat across from Sandra in a conference room and listened to her explanation. Something about being passed over for a directorship. Something about feeling invisible for 3 years. And had experienced the particular compound emotion of someone who understood the grievance and found the response indefensible. She'd let legal handle the formal portion of the conversation. She'd kept her face where it needed to be. What stayed with her afterward wasn't anger. It was something quieter and more uncomfortable. The knowledge that someone had spent 3 years feeling invisible in a company she ran, and she hadn't known. She'd been on the same floor, making decisions about people and resources, and hadn't seen it. She didn't know what to do with that. She held it and worked around it, the way you worked around something that hadn't resolved into clear action yet. What she kept returning to, in the margins of her thinking, was the other part of what the security review had turned up. The credential theft. The deliberate use of Logan's login to obscure Sandra's tracks. Someone had looked at the access list and chosen his name specifically, chosen him as the person most useful to implicate or most plausible to frame, or simply most convenient. She didn't know which. She wasn't sure which was worse. She'd cleared him before the report was finished. She'd made that call on incomplete information because the incomplete information was already enough. And she'd learned over the course of a decade that waiting for certainty when you had sufficient clarity was usually just waiting for permission you didn't actually need. She didn't regret the call. She did sit with the fact that she'd made it the way she had, fast, before Arthur had finished compiling, before the procedural logic fully justified it, and understood something about herself that she would have previously denied. She hadn't cleared him because the evidence was sufficient. She'd cleared him because she couldn't stand the alternative, because the idea of Logan Pierce sitting in a conference room on her floor under a cloud she could disperse. And choosing not to disperse, it was genuinely intolerable to her in a way that transcended professional judgment. That wasn't how she made decisions. She made decisions based on evidence and analysis and the considered weight of competing interests. Except, apparently, sometimes she didn't. She let that sit. She was getting better at letting things sit. Friday arrived the way school events did in Logan's week, as both something he'd known about and something that still managed to feel slightly sudden when it was actually upon him. He left work at 4:30, which was early enough to register as early and late enough that he'd finished what needed finishing, went home, changed out of his work shirt into something that wasn't a work shirt, and discovered Ava already dressed and sitting on the couch with the particular composure of someone who had been ready for 30 minutes and was being patient about it. She was wearing the blue dress she wore for things she considered important. He registered this and did not comment on it. "Ready?" he said. "I've been ready," she said, standing. "I know." She'd been quieter than usual all week, in the specific way of someone with something on their mind that they'd decided they were going to handle themselves. He'd respected it. He'd watched her from the corner of his eye the way he did when he was worried, but knew that asking would close rather than open whatever door she was deciding whether to use. The school gymnasium had been arranged for the evening with the specific optimism of institutional decoration. Tables with small centerpieces, a stage at one end with a curtain that was trying its best, rows of chairs facing it. Other parents and their children were already filtering in when Logan and Ava arrived, and the air had that particular school event quality of barely contained chaos being managed into something resembling order. Logan found them seats at the middle left, which Ava approved of with a nod, then said, "I have to go check in with Ms. Okafor." "Okay," she hesitated. "Dad." "Yeah." She looked at him. The full look, the one that meant she was deciding something. Just watch, okay? When it's my part. Actually watch. Ava, I know you always watch. I mean, really watch. Like, don't look at your phone. I don't look at my phone. You looked at it at the winter concert in December. There was a production issue. Dad, he stopped. I'll watch, he said. I promise. She held the look for a beat, then nodded, apparently satisfied with something she'd seen in his face that he hadn't consciously put there, and disappeared through the side door toward the backstage area. Logan sat in his folding chair in the middle left of the Millfield Elementary Gymnasium and looked at the stage curtain and wondered what exactly he'd just agreed to. Victoria arrived at 7:12. She'd told herself it was about the sponsorship review. Meridian had a corporate giving relationship with 3 schools in the district, and Millfield was one of them, and there was a check-in scheduled with the school's development coordinator that she'd been meaning to handle through normal channels, but had, for reasons she wasn't fully examining, decided to attend in person. This was a thing she believed about herself while she was getting dressed. She believed it through the drive over and most of the walk from the parking lot. She believed it until she was standing at the gymnasium entrance and looking at a room full of families, and she saw Logan sitting in the middle left section in a shirt she'd never seen him wear before, dark blue, not his work shirt, and understood with the sudden clarity that occasionally arrived when you'd been lying to yourself long enough that she was not here about the sponsorship review. She was here because she hadn't been able to not be here. She stood in the doorway for a moment. Then she found the development coordinator, a cheerful woman named Beth, who was clearly thrilled to have executive attendance at this particular event, and spoke very quickly about the partnership for several minutes. Victoria listened, asked 2 useful questions, confirmed the funding parameters, and told Beth she'd have her office follow up on the details. Then she took a seat in the back row, which was what a person attending professionally would do, and tried to look like she was doing exactly that. The program began. Students cycled through, short performances, a skit, a presentation about the fall science fair. Parents applauded with the enthusiastic dedication of people whose specific child was on stage and the polite attention of people whose child was not. Logan watched the stage with his arms folded loosely on his knees, posture slightly forward. He didn't take out his phone once. When Ava walked onto the stage, Logan went very still, not visibly. He didn't move differently, didn't change his posture, but something in the quality of his attention shifted in a way that Victoria, watching from the back row, registered without understanding how she registered it. Ava was in the blue dress. She was holding a sheet of paper that she clearly wasn't going to read from, but was carrying anyway, in the way of someone who needed to know a safety net existed. She stepped to the microphone with the careful precision of someone who had practiced this part and was now executing it. "My name is Ava Pierce," she said. "I'm in 4th grade. I'm going to sing something, but first I want to say something." The room quieted. Children did this sometimes, departed from the prepared script, and the crowd instinctively settled into a different kind of attention. "My dad is here tonight," Ava said. She looked out into the audience and found him. "There he is, middle left." A ripple of gentle laughter from the crowd. Logan's expression did something complex and brief that resolved back into stillness. "My dad works really hard," Ava said. "He works hard at his job and he works hard at being my dad, and I know that's a lot. And for a long time," she paused in the pause of someone measuring their words carefully, "I've been the only one he takes care of things for. And I've been thinking about that." The room was very quiet. "My mom died when I was 3, Ava said, in the straightforward way of someone stating a fact they'd had 6 years to make peace with, or at least to live alongside. "I don't remember her very much, but my dad does, and I think he's been carrying that for a long time and not letting anybody help him carry it." She looked at her paper, then back up. "I asked Ms. Okafor if I could change my song choice. She said yes. So she looked at her father again. "This one is for you, Dad, because you always take care of everyone. And I think it's somebody else's turn." Logan's jaw shifted, just barely. His hands, folded on his knees, pressed together once and then relaxed. Ava sang. It was a simple song, not complicated, not showy, the kind of song that didn't require a big voice to land, just a true one. Her voice was true. It had the slight unevenness of a child's voice that hadn't finished finding itself yet, and it was absolutely, unmistakably sincere. And every parent in the gymnasium was doing the careful work of not crying in front of other parents. Victoria was not crying. She was sitting in the back row with her hands in her lap and her throat tight, and her eyes on the stage where a 9-year-old girl in a blue dress was singing about care and carrying things. And she was also watching Logan, and she was watching him absorb this in public with the same composure he brought to everything, except that the composure was working much harder than usual, and she could see it working. She could see the exact weight of it. When the song ended, the applause was the warm, genuine kind. Ava stepped back from the microphone and looked at her father, and something passed between them across the gymnasium, wordless, too specific to be translated, the particular frequency of a parent and child who had spent 9 years in the same small apartment learning each other's silences. Then Ava looked, with the directness of a child who hadn't yet learned to be subtle about where her eyes went, directly at Victoria. Victoria didn't look away. She wasn't sure she could. Ava held the look for a moment. Then she walked off the stage. The event wound down in the way these things did. Gradually, with the reassembly of coats and the gathering of programs and the slow social dissolution of people who'd been briefly united by shared experience and were now going back to their separate evenings. Victoria stayed in her seat longer than she should have. She was aware of this. She stayed because leaving required her to walk through the room, and because walking through the room meant the possibility of walking near Logan, and she wasn't sure what she would do with that possibility. She also stayed because Ava's words were still in her, sitting in a way that was physical, lodged somewhere between her sternum and her spine, pressing gently. He always takes care of everyone. I hope someday someone takes care of him. She hadn't said it exactly that way, but that was what she'd meant. Victoria had understood it with a precision that bypassed language entirely. She was still sitting there when Logan turned around to retrieve his jacket from the chair behind him and registered her presence. She watched the moment of recognition cross his face, the slight recalibration of someone who had not expected to see the person they were now seeing in this particular location at this particular hour. He didn't look away. She didn't either. For a moment, neither of them did anything with it. Then he stood with his jacket and walked toward her, which she hadn't expected. And now she was sitting in a folding chair in the back row of an elementary school gymnasium, looking up at her senior architect in his dark blue shirt, and absolutely no part of her professional training had prepared her for this exact configuration. "Ms. Sinclair," he said. "Logan." She stood, because sitting while he was standing was a dynamic she didn't want. "I was here about the Meridian Partnership Review, with the development coordinator." He looked at her, the look that evaluated whether she meant what she said. She held it. She was not certain she was convincing. "Right," he said. Not in a dismissive way. In the way of someone deciding to accept the stated explanation because making someone account for an unstated one was not something he did. "How was that?" "Productive." She paused. Ava was, she began, then found she didn't have a clean finish to that sentence. "Yeah," he said quietly. She was. There was a silence that was full in the specific way of silences between two people who have things to say and are deciding whether this is the time and place for them. Around them, the gymnasium was still clearing. Parents and children streaming toward the exit, volunteers beginning to fold chairs. "She knew you were here," Logan said. Victoria looked at him. "I gathered. She doesn't miss much." "No," Victoria said. "She doesn't." Another silence. He looked tired, not differently than he usually looked, but she'd been paying close enough attention for long enough now that she could read the gradations. This was the particular tiredness of someone who had just been moved by something in public and was managing the aftermath. She recognized it because she'd spent the last 40 minutes managing her own version of the same thing. "She's remarkable," Victoria said. She meant it without any of the professional smoothness she sometimes used when she meant things. Said it plainly, the way you said things when you were tired of the distance between what you meant and how you packaged it. Logan looked at her for a moment. "Thank you," he said. Yeah, she is." He said it like a man who knew it, and found it almost unbearable sometimes, how remarkable his daughter was, how clearly she saw things. Ava appeared from the side door, cast and all, backpack slightly lopsided, and stopped when she saw them standing together. Her expression did something quick and interested that she immediately arranged into neutrality, which she pulled off about as well as a 9-year-old could pull off neutrality, which was not very well at all. "Miss Sinclair," she said, with a formality that was about 60% genuine and 40% performance. "You were wonderful up there," Victoria told her. Ava received this with composure. "Thank you. Did you understand what I meant?" Logan said, "Ava, I'm not being rude," Ava said. "I'm asking an actual question." Victoria looked at her. The child was watching her with the brown eyes that were her father's in miniature. Same quality of attention, same patience, the same willingness to wait for an honest answer rather than accept a comfortable one. "Yes," Victoria said. "I understood what you meant." Ava nodded, apparently satisfied. "Okay." She looked at her father. "Can we stop at the diner? I want hot chocolate." "It's a school night." "It's 8:15. "That's a school night. Dad, I just sang in front of like 200 people with a broken wrist." Logan looked at her. "It's a hairline fracture." "It's a fracture." She held up the soft cast with the air of someone presenting evidence. He was quiet for a second. Victoria watched him decide and watched him lose. 15 minutes, he said. "You're in bed by 9:30. Ava looked at Victoria. "He always says 15 minutes. "Ava." "Good night, Miss Sinclair," Ava said with a smile that knew exactly what it was doing. "Good night, Ava," Victoria said. Logan looked at Victoria. The look lasted a beat longer than it needed to. Not uncomfortably, but long enough that she was aware of it, aware of what was in it that neither of them was saying, aware that she was standing in an elementary school gymnasium at 8:15 on a Friday night because she had not been able to stay away. "Good night," he said finally. "Good night," she said. She watched them leave, Logan holding the door for his daughter, Ava going through it without breaking stride, already talking about the hot chocolate she wanted, making the case for extra marshmallows. The door swung shut behind them. Victoria stood in the emptying gymnasium for a long moment. Around her, chairs were being stacked. The stage curtain had been drawn back. The centerpieces were being gathered by 2 volunteers who were talking about something unrelated and laughing. She stood there and understood something she'd been constructing for months. Not arriving at exactly, but finishing the construction of. The last piece hadn't been Ava's song, or the words about taking care and being taken care of, or the look Ava had given her from the stage with that particular child's directness that bypassed every social convention adults use to keep each other at a safe distance. The last piece had been the 15 minutes he'd agreed to at the diner, even though it was a school night, because his daughter had asked, and he was constitutionally incapable of not giving her what she actually needed when she actually needed it. The last piece had been the door he'd held open without thinking about it. The small private way of a person who loved someone. She stopped fighting it somewhere in that moment. Not dramatically. There was no single feeling that arrived and announced itself as love, because she didn't entirely trust single feelings that announce themselves. It was more like acknowledging something that had been there long enough to be undeniable, like looking at a building and realizing the foundation had been laid a long time ago and you'd just been walking past it every day pretending it was still empty land. She picked up her coat. She walked out through the gymnasium doors into the cool night air and found her car and sat in it for a moment before starting the engine. She was in love with Logan Pierce. She sat with that the way she sat with facts, not arguing with it, not elaborating it, just letting it be what it was. Then she started the car and drove home, alone, through streets that were quieter than they'd been an hour ago, the city doing its nighttime thing of pulling back slightly from itself. In her apartment, the lights were on the settings she'd programmed. Warm, dim, the parameters she'd set 18 months ago and never adjusted. The living room was neat. The kitchen was clean. On the counter there was a coffee mug she hadn't put away from this morning. She sat at the table and looked at the mug. She thought about a diner 2 or 3 blocks from wherever Logan Pierce lived, where a man and his daughter were sitting across from each other right now, and the daughter was getting hot chocolate with probably an unreasonable number of marshmallows, and the man was watching her with the tiredness and the love that lived right next to each other in him all the time. She thought about the song, about what Ava had said before it. He always takes care of everyone. She pressed the heel of her hand briefly against her sternum, where the words had settled and were still pressing. Then she stood, put away the coffee mug, and went to her desk to finish the work that was waiting for her. She was still Victoria Sinclair. She still had a company to run and a Fortis situation that wasn't fully resolved, and a board meeting next Thursday that was going to be difficult. She hadn't stopped being those things. She'd just stopped being only those things. Or maybe she'd never been only those things. Maybe she just needed a 9-year-old girl in a blue dress to sing something true in a gymnasium in front of 200 people to make her willing to admit it. She opened her laptop. She worked for 2 hours. The apartment was very quiet around her, the way it always was. Tonight, for the first time in a long time, the quiet bothered her. The Monday after father-daughter night, Logan came in and did what he always did. Got coffee, sat down, opened his screen, started working. He didn't mention the gymnasium. He didn't mention Victoria being there. Marcus, who had clearly been briefed by some portion of the Meridian gossip infrastructure, was visibly waiting for him to bring it up and visibly suffering through the wait. By 10 o'clock, Marcus couldn't stand it anymore. "So," he said, rolling his chair 1.5 feet toward Logan's desk. "Friday." "What about Friday?" "The school thing." "Ava performed. It was good." "That's all you're going to give me?" "That's all there is." Marcus looked at him with the expression of a man who believed firmly that there was significantly more and was being denied access to it for no good reason. Jackie and Ops said Sinclair was there. She was reviewing the Meridian partnership with the development coordinator at a school event on a Friday night. Apparently, Logan. "Marcus, I'm your friend. I know you are. So you can tell me things." Logan looked at him with the tired patience that was one of his primary modes of communication. "There's nothing to tell. She was there. We spoke briefly. It was fine." "Fine," Marcus repeated in the tone of someone tasting a word and finding it deeply unsatisfying. "Ava sang a thing about her dad being lonely and needing someone, and Sinclair was sitting in the back row watching it, and it was fine." "You know what Ava sang?" Caroline talked to another mom who was there. "Information moves, Logan. We've discussed this." Logan turned back to his screen. "Go back to work, Marcus." "I'm just saying." "I know what you're saying. Go back to work." Marcus went back to work with the dissatisfied energy of someone who had not gotten what they came for. Logan looked at his screen and did not think about the gymnasium or the back row or the specific quality of Victoria Sinclair's expression when Ava had looked directly at her from the stage. He was, in the private accounting he kept and shared with no one, not doing well at not thinking about it. The Fortis situation resurfaced on Wednesday, and this time it didn't arrive as an industry news item or a security report. It arrived as a phone call to Victoria from Fortis's CEO, a man named Richard Hale, no relation to Arthur, who had the smooth, unhurried confidence of someone who believed he was making a generous offer. "We'd like to discuss a merger," Richard Hale said, which was the kind of sentence that sounded like a beginning and was actually an ultimatum with better manners. Victoria had listened to the proposal with the attention she gave everything, which was complete and gave nothing away. Fortis was struggling. She knew this, had known it before this call, because the Fortis product announcement had been a performance rather than a strategy, the kind of thing companies did when they needed to create the impression of momentum rather than because they actually had it. They'd overextended. The enterprise suite they'd rushed out was not performing at the level they'd projected. Their investors were asking questions. A merger with Meridian would solve most of Fortis's problems. It would also, if structured the way Richard Hale was suggesting, effectively hand Fortis control of Meridian's most valuable technical assets while leaving Meridian's leadership in an advisory role that was management in name and powerlessness in practice. "I'll have our legal team review the terms," Victoria said, because that was the correct thing to say, and ended the call. She sat for a moment, then pulled up her internal analysis of Meridian's current position. Balance sheet, client relationships, the infrastructure architecture that was, she knew now with complete clarity, the core of what made the company worth acquiring in the first place. She thought about what the architecture was built on. She thought about who had built it. She called Arthur. Get Logan Pierce, she said. I need him on 31. Today. Logan arrived at 31 at 2:15, which was faster than Arthur had expected, which meant he'd wrapped whatever he was working on and come up without making anyone wait, which was, Victoria reflected, exactly what he did. He came into her office, not the conference room, her actual office, which she used for things that required directness over formality, and sat in the chair across from her desk with his usual quality of readiness, the sense of someone who'd arrived expecting to work and was prepared to do exactly that. Fortis wants to acquire us, she said. No preamble. Logan looked at her. In what structure? Nominally a merger, practically an acquisition. They're proposing a share exchange that would give their board controlling interest and fold our leadership into advisory positions over an 18-month transition. And what happens to the technical infrastructure in that structure? It gets absorbed into the Fortis architecture under their technical leadership. He was quiet for a moment. She watched him run something through. She could almost see it, the calculation, the implications stacking up in whatever order he processed them. Their technical leadership can't run our architecture, he said. They don't have anyone who understands it at the level it needs to be understood. I've seen their engineering team's public work. They're capable, but the interdependencies in our system, the undocumented layers, the legacy accommodations, if someone who doesn't know what they're looking at starts making changes, they'll break it within 6 months. Probably less. I know, Victoria said. You're not considering accepting. No, she said it flatly. I'm considering how to prevent it, and I need to understand what we're defending. He looked at her steadily. The Enterprise Suite is the core. Everything else connects to it. If Fortis gets access to the architecture documentation, the real documentation, not the sanitized version that goes in the public spec, they can rebuild a functional version in 18 months without us. They'd be buying us to get the map, not the territory. Yes. So we don't give them the map. The merger terms include full technical disclosure in the due diligence phase. Then we don't enter due diligence. Our board is going to push back on that. Fortis went to 3 of our largest investors before they called me. They've already been having conversations I wasn't invited to. Logan processed this. How much time do we have? Before the board starts formally pressuring me to engage? A week? Maybe 10 days. And in 10 days you need what exactly? From me? She looked at him directly. I need to know what we actually have, the full picture, not the version in the formal documentation, the real version, what you built, what it actually does, why it can't be replicated by someone who doesn't have your specific knowledge of why every decision was made the way it was made. He was quiet for several seconds. Outside her window, the city went on with itself, indifferent. That's not a 10-day project, he said. I know. I need the version of it that's useful in 10 days. The argument, not the complete documentation. Something shifted in his expression. Not agreement exactly, but recognition. The recognition of someone being asked to do something difficult and real and actually mattering, rather than being asked to do something for which there was a standard process and a form to fill out. I'll need to work with the full access logs, he said. And I'll need to pull in Sophie, she's been in the system long enough to help without needing 3 weeks of context. Done. And I'll need this to be my actual work, not in addition to everything else. Obviously. He nodded once, slowly. Then, can I ask you something? She gestured for him to continue. What happens if the board overrides you? The question sat in the room. It was the right question, and she'd known it was coming because it was what she would have asked in his position. Not the safe question, the actual one. Then we document everything and make sure that when the architecture breaks under Fortis management, the record is clear about why, she said. But I don't intend to let that happen. He looked at her for a moment longer than he needed to, the look that asked whether she meant what she said. She held it. Okay, he said. The next 8 days were the most concentrated work Logan had done since the early years, when the architecture was new, and he was the only person who fully understood what he was building and why. He and Sophie worked through the documentation in the systematic way of people who understood that the goal wasn't completeness. The goal was coherence, the narrative that made a person who hadn't lived inside the system understand what it was and why it couldn't be casually replicated. Sophie, who had always been sharp, was extraordinary under pressure. She didn't need things explained twice. She asked questions that clarified rather than complicated. On the third day, she came in with a cup of coffee for Logan without being asked and put it on his desk without comment and went back to her own screen, and he registered this small kindness and filed it away next to all the other small kindnesses he'd learned to receive without making a thing of. They worked late most nights. Logan called Ava at 6:30 every evening, regardless of where he was and whatever he was doing, and Ava, who was staying with Caroline and Marcus for the week, an arrangement she'd been enthusiastic about because Caroline made better pasta than Logan did, a fact she'd shared without diplomatic softening, gave him a detailed account of her day and asked one or two pointed questions about his, and he answered them as honestly as he could without worrying her. "Are you eating?" she asked on the fourth night. Sophie got sandwiches. "That's not what I asked." "Yes, I'm eating." A pause. "Are you sleeping?" "Ava, I'm asking." "Yes, enough." Another pause, with the particular quality of a pause in which a 9-year-old is deciding whether to accept an answer she finds insufficient. "Dad." "Yeah, it's going to be okay." He was quiet for a moment. The office was almost empty around him. The floor lights dimmed to their after-hours setting, Sophie's screen the only other live point of light in the space. "I know," he said. "You always say that too." "This time I mean it differently." She seemed to accept this. "Okay. Good night." "Good night. Sleep well." He put the phone down and sat with it for a moment, with the particular weight of being loved by someone small and certain, and then went back to work. Victoria presented to the board on the 9th day. It was the hardest board presentation of her tenure, which was saying something because she'd had board presentations during the years when the company was burning cash and the path to profitability was genuinely unclear. This one was harder because the opposition wasn't uncertainty. It was 3 board members who had been talked to by Fortis's people and arrived in the room having already made up their minds. And the challenge was not to inform them, but to dismantle a position they'd privately committed to before they'd sat down. She presented Logan's documentation. Not all of it. The complete version was 400 pages and served a different purpose. She presented the 30-page argument, the one that explained the architecture not as a technical system, but as an organizational asset with specific properties that were not transferable without the specific knowledge of the people who'd built it. She presented the timeline of Fortis's product failure. She presented the financial modeling that showed what Meridian's enterprise suite was worth as a standalone business versus what Fortis was offering to pay for it. She presented the security breach, Sandra Orr, the credential theft, the coordinated approach, and named it for what it was. Fortis had been trying to get Meridian's architecture through back channels for 8 months before resorting to an acquisition offer. That wasn't a compliment. It was a measure of how much they needed what they couldn't build on their own. Martin Greer, the board member who'd been most vocally in favor of the merger discussion, said, "Victoria, the offer represents a 42% premium on current valuation. Our shareholders will see a 400% return if we maintain independent operation for 36 months, Victoria said. "The numbers are on page 18. The numbers on page 18 require performance projections that are conservative," she said. "The aggressive version is on page 19. I use the conservative version because I don't need the aggressive version to make the argument." Silence. Greer looked at the document. 2 other board members were looking at page 18. "The architecture argument is compelling," said Diana Osei, the board's technical lead, who had been quiet until now. "If what this documentation suggests is accurate, I can have the documentation verified by an independent technical auditor within 2 weeks," Victoria said. "I'd welcome it." More silence. "Who prepared this?" Diana asked. "Logan Pierce, senior architect, with assistance from one of our junior developers." Pierce. Diana looked at something on her phone. Probably the org chart, Victoria thought. "Level 4? "Yes, he's been with us 6 years. He built the original architecture and has maintained it since." "Why is a level 4 employee the sole owner of knowledge this critical to the business?" The room shifted slightly. That was the right question, and Diana knew it was the right question, and Victoria had been waiting for it because she'd been asking herself the same question for 2 weeks. He was offered promotions, Victoria said. He declined them. In retrospect, we should have structured the knowledge transfer process differently regardless of his title. That's a structural failure I'm addressing. She paused. But the knowledge exists, it's documented now, and it's the foundation of why this company is worth what it's worth. Walking away from it for a 42% premium would be leaving the majority of our value on the table. The board deliberated for 20 minutes. Victoria waited in the anteroom with her coffee, which was cold, and did not pace because pacing was not something she did, and thought about the 30-page document on the table in there with her name on the cover page and Logan Pierce's thinking inside every paragraph. Diana came out first. "We're not engaging with Fortis," she said. Victoria said, "Thank you." "You were right," Diana said, in the direct way of someone who admitted this only when it was unambiguous. "But Victoria, the level 4 thing needs to be fixed. Today." "I know," Victoria said. "It is, but." She went back to the 12th floor that afternoon, which was the second time in recent memory she'd gone there for a reason that wasn't officially on her calendar, and found Logan at his desk with the particular post-project stillness of someone who had been moving fast for 10 days and had suddenly stopped. He looked up when he saw her. The surprise was brief and controlled. "Board meeting?" he said. "They're not engaging with Fortis." Something in his expression relaxed, not visibly, not dramatically, but she was calibrated to him now in a way she hadn't been 3 months ago, and she could see it. "Good," he said. "The documentation was the argument," she said. "I want you to know that. It's what turned it." He nodded, not in a dismissive way, but in the way of someone receiving information and placing it somewhere appropriate. "I also want to talk about your title," she said. He looked at her steadily. "Chief Technology Officer," she said. "It's been vacant since Arthur moved to a consulting role. It should have been offered to you 2 years ago, and it wasn't, and that's a failure I'm correcting." He was quiet for a moment. Around them, the 12th floor continued its normal afternoon operations. Keyboards, low conversations, someone's phone buzzing twice. Normal sounds, the sounds of a company that was still standing. "That would mean the 31st floor," he said. "Yes, different hours. Comparable to what you've been working the last 10 days, she said, possibly less chaotic on average. Ava's pickup is at 3:15 on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'll have it written into your schedule, she said, without hesitation. Non-negotiable block. He looked at her. The look lasted. She held it. Why? He said finally. Not challenging, genuinely asking. The question of a person who'd spent 6 years being overlooked and was trying to understand what had changed. She considered the honest answer against the professional answer and found, standing on the 12th floor, with the afternoon light coming in from the north-facing windows, that she was too tired for the version that wasn't honest. Because you're the reason this company is worth what it's worth, she said. And because you stayed, when you had every reason not to, and you protected something that other people were trying to sell while they were pretending to be loyal to it. And because, she paused, one beat, I don't want to keep structuring things as though you're invisible. The last part was slightly more than she'd intended to say. She let it stand. His face did the thing it occasionally did, the brief, unguarded moment before the composure reassembled itself, a flash of something real and unmanaged crossing the surface before he could decide what to do with it. She'd seen it twice before. She was starting to understand it was as close as he came to showing people what was actually happening inside him. I'll think about it, he said. Take the time you need. She turned to go. She'd taken 3 steps when he said Victoria. She stopped, turned. He was still at his desk, hands folded, looking at her the way he looked at things that required careful attention. Thank you for clearing my name when the logs came back. You didn't need clearing, she said. You needed the process to catch up to what was already obvious. You didn't wait for the process. No, she said. I didn't. He held her gaze. Why not? The same question, essentially, different specificity. She said, because some things are clear enough that waiting for paperwork is just wasting time. It was not the whole answer, They both knew it wasn't the whole answer. He accepted it with the nod of someone filing it alongside other partial truths, constructing a picture from pieces that weren't yet being named directly. "Good night," she said. "Good night." She walked back to the elevator. She pressed the button for 31. The doors closed. She leaned back against the elevator wall, alone in the small ascending space, and pressed her eyes briefly shut. She was aware of her own heartbeat, which was slightly faster than normal, and aware that she'd said more on that floor today than she'd planned to and less than she'd wanted to, and aware that the gap between those two things was where everything real was living right now. The elevator reached 31. She stepped out into the good carpet and the better silence and went back to her desk. On the 12th floor below her, Logan Pierce sat at his desk for a long time without opening anything on his screen. He sat with his hands flat on the desk and looked at the north-facing window, at the building across the street going golden in the late afternoon, and thought about a woman who had walked into a gymnasium on a Friday night and sat in the back row and let a 9-year-old look directly at her from a stage. He thought about the elevator in this building and how it went from 12 to 31, and how that distance was not very far at all, and also somehow immense. He thought about Ava at the diner, talking about marshmallows. He thought about loyalty meaning something, and about home, and about the specific weight of choosing to stay. Then Marcus appeared at the edge of his desk and said, "So, CTO? How do you already know about that?" Nina told, I know. Logan rubbed his face. "I haven't decided." "Logan, it's an obvious yes. It changes things. Good things should change things." Marcus sat down in the adjacent chair. "She offered you the job herself? Came down here?" "Yes." Marcus was quiet for a moment, which was unusual enough to register. Then, more carefully than he usually said anything. "She came down here twice in 3 months, Logan, to the 12th floor, in 6 years before that. How many times did she come down?" Logan said nothing. "I'm just noting it," Marcus said, gently this time. Logan looked at the window, at the golden building across the street, at the ordinary city going about its ordinary evening. "I know," he said. "I noticed." Logan took 4 days to think about the CTO offer. He didn't agonize over it. That wasn't quite right. He turned it over the way he turned over any significant decision, which was methodically, in the margins of his regular days, examining it from the angles that mattered rather than the angles that were easier to look at. He took Ava to her Saturday piano lesson and sat in the waiting area outside the practice room and thought about it. He made dinner on Sunday. The actual kind, not takeout, because cooking was one of the things he did when he needed his hands occupied and his brain given something concrete to manage, and thought about it while the onions softened in the pan. What he kept coming back to wasn't the title or the salary or the office on the 31st floor. It was simpler and more uncomfortable than any of those things. It was the question of whether he was ready to stop being invisible, whether he'd been choosing invisibility all these years because it was genuinely what Ava needed, or because it was also, quietly, what he'd needed, the clean simplicity of being defined by one thing, by her, by the daily urgent purpose of keeping her fed and loved and cared for. Needing nothing for himself, wanting nothing for himself. It was so much easier, he'd discovered, to carry what someone else needed than to figure out what you needed yourself. Ava found him standing at the kitchen counter on Sunday evening, looking at nothing in particular with a spatula in his hand and the onions past the point of softening. "Dad, the onions." He looked down. "Right." He moved the pan off the heat. She climbed onto the counter stool, still one-handed, the cast coming off next week, a development she was anticipating with the impatience of someone who'd adapted admirably and was nonetheless tired of adapting, and watched him. "You've been thinking for 4 days," she said. "How do you know how long I've been thinking?" "Because you've had the thinking face since Thursday. It's different from the working face." "I have a thinking face." "You have like 6 different faces, Dad. I know all of them." He looked at her. She was watching him with the patient attention of someone who had decided the safest approach was to wait rather than push. And he recognized this because it was something she'd learned from him, the exact quality of restrained patience that he deployed when he knew that asking would shut a door rather than open it. "The job offer," he said. She nodded, unsurprised. "It's a big change." "I know. It would mean different hours, different, he searched for the word, exposure. More people depending on decisions I make, more visibility. Is that bad? He considered it honestly. I don't know. I've been level 4 for 6 years, and mostly I've been fine with that. Have you? She said. He looked at her. Been fine with it, she said, or just used to it. The question landed with the specific weight of something a 9-year-old shouldn't be able to ask that precisely, except that she was this 9-year-old, and she'd been watching him navigate his own life from a closer distance than anyone else on Earth. That's a good question, he said. I know. She pulled her sleeve down over the edge of the cast. Dad, I think you should take it. Yeah? You've been making yourself small because of me for a long time. I see it. I've always seen it. She said this without accusation, just as a thing she knew. I don't need you to be small. I need you to be okay. Those are different things. He put the spatula down on the counter. He looked at his daughter, at the brown eyes and the serious face, and the cast on her wrist, and the stool she was sitting on, and the 9 years of mornings and evenings, and bad toast and late nights and piano lessons and dinosaur museum trips that had brought them to this exact Sunday in this exact kitchen. When did you get this way? He said. His voice had the slightly rough quality it got when he was keeping something under control. I've always been this way, she said. You just sometimes forget because you're distracted by trying to take care of me. He laughed, an actual one, short and real, the full expression for once. She grinned at the sound of it, the particular grin of someone who'd produced something rare and was pleased about it. The onions are burned, she said. I know. We could order Thai. It's a Sunday. Food doesn't have a schedule, Dad. Fine, he said. We'll order Thai. He called Victoria on Monday morning before he came in, from the car parked 3 blocks from the office in the 15 minutes he kept for himself. This was unusual. He almost never used this time for anything external. He sat with the phone for a moment, then called. She answered on the second ring, which meant she was already at her desk. I'm accepting, he said. A pause. Brief, controlled. Good. I have a condition. The Tuesday-Thursday pickup is already in the system. There's a second one. Silence on her end, waiting. I want the technical documentation project completed before I transition, he said. The full version, not just the board argument. Proper knowledge transfer so the architecture isn't dependent on any single person's head, including mine. She paused. That's not a condition for accepting a job. That's just good practice. I know. I'm stating it anyway because I want it to be explicit, not assumed. Agreed, she said. Okay. A beat. The city outside his windshield was doing its morning thing. A bus, a woman walking a dog, 2 people in conversation at the corner. Normal Tuesday, the kind of morning that didn't know it was different from other mornings. Logan, she said. Yeah. Thank you. He wasn't sure exactly what she was thanking him for. The acceptance or the condition, or something else that was in the subtext of this conversation and had been in the subtext of most of their recent conversations. He didn't ask. See you at 9, he said, and ended the call. The transition took 3 weeks, which was fast by any reasonable standard, and slower than Victoria would have preferred, and exactly as long as it needed to be to do it right. Logan moved his things to the 31st floor with the same low-key efficiency he brought to everything. 1 box, 2 monitors, the framed photograph of Ava at the museum, the folded crayon drawing that had lived in his pen holder for 3 years and now went into the pen holder on his new desk without ceremony. Marcus helped him carry the box up in the elevator and looked around the 31st floor with the expression of someone seeing a foreign country. It's very quiet up here, Marcus said. It is. How do you feel about that? Logan looked around the space, the better carpet, the different quality of light, the sense of distance from the floor below where he'd spent 6 years being reliably present and reliably overlooked. I'll adjust, he said. You always do. Marcus set the box down on the desk. He looked at the crayon drawing that Logan was positioning in the pen holder. Is that the... Yes. You brought the drawing. Obviously. Marcus nodded, in the satisfied way of someone whose understanding of a person has just been confirmed. He picked up the empty box. I'm going back to 12. I know. You can come visit. I know that too. Marcus left. Logan stood alone in his new office for a moment. Not long, maybe 30 seconds, looking at the north-facing view, which from this height showed more sky than the building across the street. Then he sat down, opened his screens, and started work. 6 days into the new role, Fortis collapsed. Not metaphorically, the company filed for restructuring under financial distress in a process that the tech industry press covered with the particular gleeful efficiency reserved for cautionary tales. The Enterprise Suite launch had failed to convert the projected enterprise clients. 2 board members had resigned in the preceding weeks. The investigation into Sandra Orr had, in its formal disclosure requirements, surfaced documentation of Fortis's involvement in the credential theft scheme, not just as an incidental beneficiary, but as an active orchestrator. Richard Hale, who had called Victoria 4 weeks ago with the smooth confidence of a man making a generous offer, issued a press statement through his lawyers that was remarkable primarily for what it didn't say. Victoria read the news at 6:30 a.m., standing in her kitchen, and felt something she identified, after a moment, as not satisfaction. She'd expected this, or something like it, and expected outcomes didn't produce satisfaction so much as the flat sense of a calculation confirmed. What she felt was more like relief. The relief of a threat fully resolved rather than merely postponed. She also felt tired. The kind of tired that wasn't about sleep, that had been building for months, that was connected to carrying something alone. The decisions, the board, the Fortis pressure, the Sandra situation, the weight of being the person in the room who was always expected to know what came next. She'd been carrying it the way she carried everything, invisibly, without complaint, without letting it show in rooms where showing it would have changed the dynamics in ways she couldn't afford. She thought about Logan at his desk, hands folded, absorbing whatever came at him with the composure of someone who'd decided that containing his own feelings was a form of protection for the people around him. She thought about what Ava had said from the stage. She thought about the gymnasium and the back row and her hand pressed against the glass on the 31st floor. She thought, I am 30 years old and I run a company and I am also sometimes very tired and I have been pretending not to be for a very long time. She put her coffee mug down. She got dressed. She went to work. Boom. Logan was already at his desk when she arrived, which had been true every day since he'd moved to the 31st floor. He was there before her, and he was there after her, and the quality of his presence on this floor was different from how it had been on 12. Less invisible. Not because he was louder or more performative, but because he was in rooms now where people were paying attention to him, where his input was solicited and weighted and acted on, and she could see him adjusting to that in real time, day by day, the way you adjusted to a space that fit differently than the one you'd been in before. She stopped at his office. The door was open. It was always open, she'd noticed, and said, You saw the Fortis news. He looked up. Yes. How do you feel about it? It was not the kind of question she usually asked. She watched him register that. Relieved, he said, and a little sorry for the people there who didn't orchestrate anything and are now caught in it. She hadn't thought about that. She turned it over. Yes, she said. That's fair. What about you? She leaned against the doorframe, which was also not something she usually did. Relieved, she said, and tired. He looked at her steadily. When did you last take a day off? I took a Sunday in Victoria. August, she said, of last year. He said nothing. He didn't have to. The expression said it without words, the particular look of someone who recognized a pattern because they'd spent years inside their own version of it. I know, she said. You should take a few days. You took a day off in... When did you last take a day off? Christmas Eve, he said. We've established that my record is not the standard. She almost smiled. Almost. I'll consider it. You'll consider it and then not do it. Probably, she admitted. He looked at her for a moment. The morning light from the east-facing windows on this side of the floor was different from the north-facing view, warmer, more direct. She was aware of standing in a doorway having a conversation that had the shape of an ordinary professional exchange and the weight of something else entirely, and she suspected he was aware of the same thing, and she suspected they had both been aware of this gap between shape and weight for long enough that it had become its own kind of pressure. "I need to tell you something," she said. He waited, in the patient way he waited for things. She came into the office. She sat in the chair across from his desk. The same configuration as their first real conversation, the Q3 meeting, though everything about it was different now. She put her hands in her lap and looked at him directly. "I wasn't at the school event for the partnership review," she said. A pause. He said, "I know. You knew. I suspected. I didn't want to make you account for it if you weren't ready to." She absorbed this. The particular kindness of it, the way he'd given her the cover story without endorsing it, let her use it without pressing on it. She'd thought she was protecting something by saying it. He'd been protecting her by accepting it. "I was there because—" she started and stopped, because she was not someone who fumbled sentences, and fumbling this one was information. "You don't have to explain it," he said. "I want to." She looked at her hands, then back at him. "I've been paying attention to you for a long time, since before I had a reason to, professionally. And somewhere between the server outage in March and the board meeting and Ava's song," she paused, "I stopped being able to pretend it was professional attention." The office was very quiet. Below, the city moved around in its ordinary way, indifferent and continuous. Logan said, "How long?" "Since the Thursday you left early, the first time, when I heard you were meeting someone." She paused. "I was jealous. I didn't have a right to be, and I was anyway. That was when I understood that whatever I was feeling, it wasn't professional." He was quiet for a moment. He was looking at her with the full attention he brought to things that mattered, and she held it without deflecting, which was harder than most things she did. "That was 4 months ago," he said. "Yes." "You've been carrying that for 4 months." "Yes." Another silence. She watched something move across his face, not the flash of unguarded emotion she'd seen before, but something slower and more deliberate, like a decision being made in real time. "I have a daughter," he said. "She is the first thing in my life. She will always be the first thing. That's not going to change regardless of anything else." "I know," Victoria said. "I would never ask it to." "I'm not easy," he said. "I work too much, and I don't talk about what's going on with me until I've been sitting with it for too long, and I have—" he paused, choosing the word— "a complicated relationship with needing things from people. I don't do it gracefully." "I'm aware," she said quietly. "I have the same problem." He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "I know you do." "Is that a yes or a no?" she asked. The directness of it surprised him. She could see that, the slight widening, then the settling. He'd expected her to leave more room, more diplomatic ambiguity. She hadn't. She was too tired for that. "It's a—" He stopped. Started again. "I noticed you," he said. "I've been noticing you for a long time. And I've been telling myself it was circumstantial, that you were my employer and I was constructing things that weren't there, because that was the version that made the most sense and required me to do nothing with it." He paused. "I'm not good at doing things with it. With—" He gestured slightly at the space between them. "This." "Neither am I," she said. "I don't have a better track record than you." "So what are you suggesting?" She looked at him. "I'm suggesting we figure it out. Not all at once, just—" She searched for the shape of what she meant. "Stop pretending we're not doing whatever this is, and figure it out." The silence stretched for a moment, not uncomfortably. Outside, a plane crossed the sky slowly, visible in the eastern window, leaving a thin white line. "There's still a significant professional complication," he said. "Yes." "You're my employer." "Technically, the board is your employer. I'm your, she paused, "colleague, in a significant power differential." That's one way to frame it. It's the accurate frame. It's a complication. I'm not pretending it isn't. "How do you want to handle it?" "Carefully," she said. Transparently with HR once we understand what there is to be transparent about. No special treatment in either direction. She paused. I'm not going to pretend it's simple. It isn't. But I've spent the last 4 months pretending I wasn't feeling what I was feeling, and that wasn't simple either, and it was considerably less honest. He was quiet for a moment. Then, with something in his voice that was warmer than his usual register, not dramatically different, but different enough. Ava likes you. I got that impression. She doesn't like most people, not quickly. She's suspicious of adults who perform niceness. Smart. She got it from her mother. He said it simply, with the matter-of-factness of someone who'd had years to integrate the grief into the way they spoke about it. Not sealed off, not raw, just present. Part of the sentence. She looked right at you from the stage. Yes. She told me afterward. He stopped. What did she tell you? He looked at his hands for a moment. She told me you had a real face. That some people have a face they show in public and a different one when they don't think anyone's watching, and you have the same face both times. He looked up. She noticed you standing in the gymnasium after everyone had left. She was looking through the window in the side door. Victoria thought about the empty gymnasium, the centerpieces being gathered, her hand pressed briefly to her sternum. I didn't know that, she said. She didn't say it as a criticism. She said it like, he paused again, finding the words, like she'd been checking something, and the answer came back the way she'd hoped. Victoria looked at him. Her throat was doing something she was managing with effort. She's remarkable, Logan. I know. His voice had the roughness in it again, the sound of something being held carefully. She's the best thing I've ever done. She's also 9 years old and has been running a low-level campaign to improve my personal life for approximately 18 months. And I want to be very clear that I am not accepting personal decisions on her behalf. Of course. But I'm also... He stopped. Not unaware, he said finally, of what she was saying from the stage. He looked at her. She looked at him. The distance across his desk was not very far, and also the sum of everything that had happened to bring them to this exact Tuesday morning. A burned piece of toast, and a server outage, and a personnel file, and a gymnasium in October, and 10 days of concentrated work, and a board meeting, and a phone call from a parking space 3 blocks away. Dinner, he said. Not a work dinner, an actual dinner, somewhere that isn't connected to this building. Yes, she said. Saturday. I'll ask Caroline to have Ava. I'd like to meet her first, properly. He looked at her, slightly surprised. If this is going to be something, Victoria said, I don't want Ava to find out after. I'd rather she knows I'm not... She searched for it, arriving in her life through a side door. The surprise shifted into something else on his face, something that wasn't the flash of unguarded feeling, but quieter and more lasting than that. Okay, he said. When? Sunday. Come for lunch. I'll warn her the night before, which means she'll have approximately 12 hours to prepare opinions. He paused. You should know that she will have opinions. I'm counting on it. Sunday lunch was pasta. Victoria arrived at 12:15 with a bakery box, not flowers, which she'd considered and rejected as too formal, and not wine, which was obviously wrong, and found the apartment door opened by Ava before she'd finished knocking, which suggested she'd been standing near it. Hi, Ava said, with the measured assessment of someone who had been thinking about this moment and was now executing their plan. Hi, Victoria said. I brought something sweet. I didn't know what you liked. Ava looked at the box. Is it from the bakery on Clement Street? It is. Ava took the box, opened it, inspected it, and said, These are good, with the tone of a verdict that was favorable but not fully delivered yet. Then she stepped back from the door to let Victoria in. The apartment was smaller than Victoria had expected, and she'd corrected for that expectation already, and it was still smaller. It had the specific quality of a place that had been made to work by someone who was good at making things work. Every surface doing its job, nothing wasted, a kitchen that was clearly the functional center, bookshelves that had outgrown their allocated space, a couch with a worn spot on the left cushion that was obviously Logan's. On the refrigerator, under a magnet shaped like a whale, was a drawing. She recognized the style. Same hand as the crayon portrait she'd seen in the pen holder on 12, then 31. Two figures, labeled Me and Daddy. Logan came in from the kitchen. He had an apron on which she hadn't seen before, and sauce on his left wrist, which she also hadn't seen before, and he looked different. Not a different person, but a different version of the person she knew. The version that existed in this apartment on Sunday mornings without the controlled composure that he wore in the office, the way other people wore suits. He looked looser. Not relaxed exactly, but like someone whose default setting in this space was a fraction closer to actually himself. "You're early," he said. "I'm exactly on time." "You're 15 minutes early." "I thought I should account for traffic." "There's no traffic on Sundays." "I know that now." Ava looked between them with the expression of someone cataloging data. "Dad, the sauce," she said. He looked at his wrist, then went back to the kitchen. Ava looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Ava. "He burns things sometimes," Ava said confidentially. "The toast," Victoria said. Ava's eyebrows went up. "He told you about the toast?" "Not exactly, I inferred." Ava considered this with evident approval. "You can sit down," she said, gesturing at the table. "I'll get you water. We have sparkling or regular." "Regular, please." "Good choice. Dad thinks sparkling is fancy, but it's actually kind of aggressive." Victoria sat at the kitchen table and watched Ava get the water with the careful efficiency of someone who was very used to being useful in this kitchen, and thought about 4 months and a personnel file and a server log and a back row in a gymnasium, and thought that none of the paths that had led her here had looked at the time like they were leading here. That was perhaps the truest thing about the way important things happened. You didn't see them coming, you just looked up one day and found yourself inside them. Lunch was pasta and bread and a salad that Ava had assembled herself and presented as a collaborative project, though Logan, under questioning, confirmed her role had been primarily the cherry tomatoes. "That's still 50% of the salad," Ava said. "Volume-wise, sure," he said. "I don't know what that means." "I know." They ate. Victoria had eaten work lunches and professional dinners and the efficient meals she made for herself at her kitchen counter, and she'd forgotten, or maybe never properly known, what it felt like to eat with people who were entirely comfortable in each other's presence, who spoke without performing, who let silences happen and didn't feel obligated to fill them. Ava asked Victoria questions with the directness of someone who had prepared them in advance and was executing a list. What was her job, actually? Did she like it? Was it hard? Did she have family? What did she do when she wasn't working? "I run," Victoria said to the last one. "Like for exercise?" "Yes." "Dad doesn't run. He does the thing where you look at your phone and then think about work." "That's called being bad at resting," Logan said. "You literally just described yourself." "I know." Ava turned back to Victoria. "Do you know how to rest?" Victoria thought about it honestly. "Not especially." Ava looked at her father. "Maybe you can both be bad at it together," she said, with the studied casualness of someone who had landed exactly the sentence they meant to land and was now examining her pasta. Logan looked at the ceiling briefly. Victoria looked at her water glass. The moment sat between all three of them with the quality of something that had been said and understood and would not be referenced directly for some time, which was the appropriate thing to do with something true. After lunch, Ava showed Victoria the crayon drawing on the fridge without being asked, just pointed at it and said, "I made that when I was 6, with the matter-of-fact ownership of a person who knows their own work." "It's wonderful," Victoria said. "Dad has one at work too." "I know. I've seen it." Ava looked at her with the look. The same look from the stage, the same measuring quality. "You notice things," she said. "I try to." "Dad notices things too," Ava said. "He just doesn't always say what he notices." "I'm aware," Victoria said. "Someone should tell him that's frustrating." "Someone probably should," Victoria agreed. "It's frustrating, Dad," Ava said to Logan, who was clearing the table. "Noted," he said. "She agreed with me." "I heard. So what are you going to do about it?" He stopped clearing and looked at them, at his daughter, and the woman sitting at his kitchen table in the apartment where he'd spent 6 years being defined by absence and purpose and the clean simplicity of need, and something in his face did the full unguarded thing, Not the flash this time, but the whole expression, open and ungoverned and real in the way that faces were when the person wearing them stopped deciding what to show. "I'm working on it," he said. Ava looked at Victoria. Victoria looked at Ava. "That's better than usual," Ava said. Later, after Ava had gone to her room to read, and the afternoon had settled into the particular quiet of a Sunday that had been well used, Logan and Victoria sat on the small porch off the living room with coffee that he'd made, and the autumn doing its thing with the light. That specific October amber that made everything look briefly more permanent than it was. "She approved," he said. "I know." "How do you know?" "She told me the bakery pastries were good." That's high praise from her, actually." "I gathered." Victoria looked at the yard below. Small, partly overgrown, a few leaves already scattered on the grass. "Logan." "Yeah." "I've been alone for a long time," she said. "Not in a way I've talked about, in a way I've defended as a choice." He looked at her. "I'm not good at this," she said. "I want you to know that going in. I'm not going to be someone who's naturally easy to be with. I work too much and I process things internally, and sometimes I make decisions before I've told the person they affect that I'm making them. Like clearing my name before the report was done," he said. "Like that? Yes." She paused. "I'm telling you the problems first because I think you deserve to know them first." He was quiet for a moment. A leaf came down from the tree at the edge of the yard. A single slow spiral, catching the amber light on the way. "I know about problems," he said. "I have a list of my own." He looked at his coffee. "I spent 6 years making myself small and calling it sacrifice. I'm only just starting to understand the difference between genuinely putting someone else first and using that as a reason not to want things for yourself." He paused. "I don't have that figured out. I'm telling you so you know." "I know," she said. "And you still—" "Yes," she said simply. He looked at her. She looked at him. The autumn light fell over both of them, impermanent and particular, the way light was in October when the angle changed and every ordinary thing was briefly golden. "Okay," he said. It wasn't a grand thing to say. It was small and plain and exactly right. "Okay," she said. I said, "Here is what happened in the months that followed, told plainly, without the edges smoothed. They had dinners that went well and one that went badly, when Victoria canceled with 2 hours' notice because of a board emergency, and Logan, who had arranged everything and gotten Ava settled at Marcus's and sat in a restaurant waiting, was quiet about it in a way that was worse than anger. They talked about it the following morning, which was uncomfortable in the specific way of two people who are both bad at direct emotional conversation, attempting to have one, and got somewhere by the end of it that was better than where they'd started. They did not pretend it hadn't happened. Ava got her cast off in November and played a full piece at her winter concert in December, and Victoria sat in the audience. Not the back row this time. She had a seat that Ava had specifically designated, second row center, and watched Logan watch his daughter play, and felt something settle in her chest that was quieter than happiness and more durable. Logan took 3 days off at Christmas. Actual days off. No laptop, no emergency login at 2 a.m. He did not do this gracefully. He was bad at it in the specific way he'd said he would be bad at it, checking his phone too often on the first day and being caught doing it by Ava, who confiscated the phone with the authority of someone who had earned this specific enforcement, but he did it. Victoria joined them on the afternoon of the second day, which had not been the original plan, but Ava had called her on Logan's phone, the confiscated one, and said, "Are you doing anything right now? Dad made too much food." And Victoria had driven over. She stayed for dinner and then for the evening, and at some point after Ava had fallen asleep on the couch under a blanket she'd dragged from her room, Logan and Victoria sat in the kitchen with the overhead light down low and the remains of too much food on the counter and talked. Not about work, not about anything that required resolution, just talked, the way people talked when they were tired and comfortable and did not have to perform anything for anyone. It was the best conversation Victoria had had in years. She told him this. "It's not even a special conversation," he said. "I know," she said. "That's what makes it." He looked at her. She looked at him. The kitchen was warm and slightly messy, and the apartment was quiet except for Ava's breathing in the next room, and outside the city was doing its quiet Christmas evening thing, snow that year, which was rare and made everything temporarily softer. "I've been thinking," he said. "About?" "About the fact that for 6 years I kept the drawing Ava made when she was 6 in a pen holder on my desk." "Yes." "And everyone who sat at that desk would have seen it." "Yes." "But I never showed it to anyone. I never said what it meant." He looked at his coffee mug. "I kept things that mattered right in front of me and didn't say they mattered." She understood what he was saying. "And now?" He looked at her directly. "This matters," he said. "I'm saying it. This—" He gestured slightly at the warm kitchen and the sleeping child and the space between them. "Matters to me. I don't want to keep things I care about in a pen holder and never say what they are." She felt the back of her throat tighten. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay," he said. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. A simple thing, the weight of his hand on hers, warm and real and not at all dramatic. She turned her hand over. They sat like that in the kitchen while the snow came down outside. People who know Victoria Sinclair well will tell you she is precise, demanding, and not given to sentiment. They're right. That hasn't changed. She still shows up first and leaves last and expects everyone in her room to have done their homework. She still runs on Saturday mornings, still reads everything, still makes decisions before some people have finished identifying the problem. What's different, and it's different in ways that are hard to point to directly, in ways that exist in the texture of how she moves through a day rather than in any single observable change, is that she is less alone inside herself. The thing she was always carrying invisibly is lighter now, not because she carries less of it, but because she is no longer convinced that needing help with the weight is a failure. She learned that from a man who had spent 6 years being essential to everyone around him while quietly believing that his own needs were an inconvenience he wasn't entitled to have. And Logan Pierce, who still drinks bad coffee when he's thinking and still takes 15 minutes in the car before work. Though those 15 minutes are different now because there is someone who texts him something small in the morning. Not always profound, sometimes just a stupid observation about the commute or a question about what Ava wants for her birthday, and the ordinary presence of it has changed the quality of the quiet. Logan Pierce accepted the CTO title and the office on the 31st floor and discovered that being seen was uncomfortable for about 2 months, and then became gradually simply what was. He still has the drawing in the pen holder. Ava made him a new one, slightly better proportioned, the figures recognizable, and next to me and Daddy, a third figure, slightly taller, labeled in careful letters, V. He put it next to the original. He didn't say what it meant. He didn't have to. What this story is, finally, is not a love story in the way those words are usually understood. With the moment, the declaration, the clean narrative of two people finding each other and everything resolving. It's messier than that, and smaller in some ways, and more durable because of both. It's about what happens when people who have been carrying things alone long enough that they've forgotten there's another option are finally, slowly, imperfectly, without much grace, willing to put something down. Not everything. You don't put everything down. You just stop pretending you aren't tired. Ava Pierce is 10 now. She started playing a new piece, more complex, both hands fully required. On the afternoon she performed it for the first time in their living room, Logan and Victoria sat on the couch, and she played it through without stopping. And when she finished, she looked up with the expression of someone who'd done something difficult and knew it. "Well," she said. "Beautiful," Victoria said. Ava looked at her father. "Yeah," he said, and his voice had the roughness in it. "Beautiful." Ava nodded, accepting this, and turned back to her music to play it again. Outside, the afternoon was doing what October afternoons did. The light long and amber, the leaves coming down in the yard, the city continuing on with its vast and different life. And inside the apartment, the three of them were together in the ordinary way of people who have decided, without announcement or ceremony, that together is what they are. That was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.